part of my Friday. It starts bright and early on Fuzzy Logic, and today we are talking about content ratings. There is so much to cover today, so we are going to jump right in. I am here with Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, and Elsie Escobar, the podcast pundit, and we are going to jump straight. Oh, it says fix my name, Bree says. We will fix that name while it's rolling. Bree, please throw those intro credits, please. There we go. Fix the name. We're all here. How's it going? Happy Friday, Gordon. Happy Friday, Elsie.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. I know that we've been anxiously awaiting and anticipating this. We had pre-pro early this week, so we've had a lot of time to mull on this conversation and what we might be getting into today. And I want to start with what I hope is a softball, but keeps us grounded as we go today. And I want to start it by asking each of you, and I'll start with you, Elsie. What is a value that you hold close, like a core value that's important to you? Because, of course, we all have our different factors that we bring to it, but when it comes to the ethical piece, it's a lot of our heart and our soul. So I wondered if you each could share one value that you think is going to help guide you through this discussion.
Yeah, I think that as it pertains to this discussion specifically, I don't know if it's exactly a value, but it's something that I often look at is self-reflection, and self-reflection in the sense of being able to always ask what part of it is true, especially when I get reactive over something that's coming at my way. It doesn't mean that I am letting go of the things that are meaningful to me or the things that are important to me or the things that I really want to champion, but it really allows me to have that sense of, hey, maybe what I've been thinking about is no longer something that I align with, or where did this point of view come from? And why am I not questioning in that for myself? And so it allows me to take personal accountability for that. So that's how I'm going into this. And I would love for folks that are listening to also consider their own personal accountability and self-reflection as they go through this.
Love that. How about yourself, Gordon?
Well, that's hard. I mean, I joked a little bit right before we started about, just personal pleasure. That's the thing. But no, I think what's really important to me, I think, is giving back, sharing knowledge and information, and moving society forward through open lines of communication. So freedom of speech, freedom of communication, and all that. And but with the caveat that we have to strike a balance in everything we do. So I'm all for freedom of speech, but there are some times and places where maybe we need to put some brakes on things. So.
What a great intro to today's topic. Yeah, I'll share mine very quickly. It's simply development. I'm always hoping to move things forward when I'm involved in them, whatever that means for the conversation or the person that we're working with, because it's a little different for all of us. But I love the self-reflection piece. I love the freedom to communicate, because I think they both play such a critical role in development. It's very tough to develop if you are constantly stuck in your own vacuum. So on that note, let's hop into it. We're talking about kids and content ratings and safe spaces and how we can possibly even touch that in podcasting, and if we should touch that. There's so many questions floating around, because as we talk about every week here, the medium that we play in most often in this group in podcasting in terms of the industry is one that doesn't have a tradition of ratings like the movie industry, for instance, does, in the TV industry. So I thought we would jump in there, Gordon, with you, and just ask a pretty simple question, which is it can you get busted for violating that content rating? If I'm a movie or TV producer now, is that something that if I do, is there regulation? Is there oversight to that? And if so, where does it come from?
Well, the way the movie content rating system works is the producers don't decide what the rating is going to be. They run the film past an organization. The Motion Picture Association of America is a body of people, a random, supposedly random sample of people from around the country who screen the movies, and they have a list of criteria that they use to decide what the rating will be on the film, and that is the rating you get. So if you're making a movie, you keep in mind what are those rules, what are those criteria, and if you want the R rating, you aim for the R. If you want the PG, you follow the rules, and then the ratings board is what it's commonly referred to. They decide and they stamp the rating on it, and that is an industry self-regulation organization. It's not a government body. The board is appointed by members of the industry, and that was done as a reaction to, during the World War II era, the U.S. government had an office called the Hayes Office. That was its job, was the censorship, to make sure that we weren't putting out sensitive information that could be used in wartime against national security kinds of things. But after the war, the film industry was concerned that it was going to start to be used to censor content on other bases, and so rather than let Congress make a law and create a whole body to do this, the industry got together and said, we'll do it ourselves. Thank you very much. And it's been a pretty good system all these years. So is there a consequence to violating it? You can't really violate it because the film's already been made by the time the board comes into making its ruling. But the consequence of making a movie that doesn't meet the criteria is you end up with an R rating or an unrating. You can release a movie without a rating, and there are some folks that do that, but it's harder to get onto the screens of the big theaters or onto Netflix if you don't have a rating. So
yeah, that's fascinating. Oh, Elsie, are you?
I was muted. As I was talking,
okay.
I was muted. It also, it's really interesting because back in another life, I did make a movie once, and it was a horror flick, one of those ones where everybody gets killed and there's a killer and all that stuff.
Mhm.
And I distinctly remember that there was discussion at that time where there were some bits where even within when we were shooting, they were like, we have to remove these lines, like literally dialogue or certain shots where it
too
would
much
take
blood,
it
too much gore.
from exactly. And so sometimes it's so nuanced to move from like we ended up with a PG-13. I think it was a PG-13 to R rating, was something that had nothing to do with the actual plot of the movie. It had to do with one or two like cuss words, if you will. Like you can only have X or certain things, or you can't have that much blood. Like you have to cut that scene out, which was maybe a little more graphic than another. And I was like, that's it. Like I remember being on the other side of things going, wow, okay.
But then you put on your parenting hat and you realize you probably wouldn't want your 15-year-old kid to see something that is rated R because of the amount of gore or blood or horrific scenes.
Well, I mean, to push back a little bit, there's been a couple times where I was like, oh no, this movie is rated R. I can't show this movie to my kids. And I thought it was a great movie. And then I'm like, why is it a rated R movie? And it was some random thing where I was just like, you mean that's why it was rated R? Well, so I showed it to my kids because it didn't even matter, right? So I think that there is that sense where you have to know exactly what it is. I already was going to take us into the rest of the conversation.
But that's the point is that once it gets that R rating, it becomes as a parent, your choice. The kids can't just go to that movie on their own. And that's what we're trying to do, is give the parents some element of control or influence over what they see. Now, I mean, the fact of it is kids will go to see the R movie because it's an R, at some point they want the forbidden fruit, essentially. So we have to be mindful. Actually, the X rating isn't part of the official rating system that the MPAA puts out, but the X and triple X became a brand almost for the adult industry. So it's
interesting because like for the way that, going back to podcasting, in podcasting, there really is two. It's either explicit or clean. Like that's it,
Yeah.
right? It's explicit or clean in the RSS feed. So let's get very, very clear. In the RSS feed, not in the content, in the RSS feed.
Right.
Now, the way that most platforms describe what explicit means is almost, it's like 99.9% around profanity, just profanity.
Really?
Just that's it. It has nothing to do with what's being discussed on the show. It's all around profanity. And so if you are having a very difficult conversation about divorce, about sexual abuse, about abortion, that you might be having conversations like this, not from a discussion around titillation, but actual real discussing real things. It doesn't matter that you're having these difficult conversations, and it's not going to be marked explicit because it's not about the topic, it's about the profanity. And so you as a parent, initially, you just have to figure out and go like, oh my gosh. So what we tend to do as producers is to open up a show and go, hey folks, today we're going to be talking about some very adult issues. If you do have little ears around, please make sure that you are aware, right? Essentially, so that whoever's listening can make that choice. But that explicit setting, when you read those inside of things, are almost 100% centered around profanity. So it could be just somebody dropped a couple of F words or any other of the profane words that are out there. And it might be super like a great discussion and nothing else happens, but there's a couple of F words that popped in there. That's explicit. And you will get kicked out for that.
Really? That's fascinating because Facebook probably doesn't care. Social media probably doesn't care in terms of I could be wrong about this, but with content ratings in particular, with just the word, it's interesting because you could type that into a Facebook wall or into a comment, and I would imagine it would not trigger anything. You both mentioned that you have some regulatory measures in that. Does it pick up on that in those platforms, Elsie, with the one that you use or what you have experience with?
What platform? What are you talking about?
The user, the app that you use to sort of stay in touch with everything online with the kids. I know that it pops up if there's something of concern, right? So does that give you explicit language as well, or?
Oh, you mean like, all right. So in the third party type app that I was using before, which was Bark, you can actually choose when you are setting up that system, you are given a choice to be able to outline the type of language or the type of sentiment to be aware of. Sometimes profanity is one of them, but it also gives you, some kind of suicidal ideation type trigger words, violence type trigger words, sexual trigger words. So you can pick the ones that you want to be alerted for, and you can also pick the range. So like super whatever, any kind of sexual word or any kind of profanity, or you can soften it a little bit to go like, this not so hard, maybe just like super crazy stuff. So you can pick that in there, and then it alerts you based on what's happening with the content the kids are consuming in some places.
Thank you for the little bit of insight there, because it's real interesting that it's just on profanity in a world where there's so many potential things that would, let's just say, scare a person. Profanity is, it seems like, maybe not at the top of the list sometimes for some people, but very, very cool stuff with the RSS not being really on the grid in that way. And that's what somebody brought up in the comments when we asked, like, where is the role, or should there be ratings in podcasting? We had a gentleman that was very straightforward. We had a couple that were really straightforward, not surprisingly. And one said, nobody. I disagree with the concept. Things work well now. And this was in response to who should who should have oversight on something like content ratings and podcasts. And it was very straightforward. And then on the flip side, we had this man named Daniel, who I think some of us probably know. And he said, yes, we've been working on that in podcasting 2.0. And it's an entire discussion, it sounds like, for this person.
Yeah.
So it does seem like there are some strong feelings for sure. We talked about it ahead of time, whether it should be kids, the government, or parents. Like, how do you get involved in that? But I think the first question related directly to this in a yes-no format is, should the government, should law, should legal have a place in overseeing ratings anywhere? Because it sounds like right now there's not much. Do you think there's a benefit to that?
I get really antsy every time somebody talks about the government stepping in and telling anyone what they can and cannot say or do or see or watch or listen to or read and understand. And maybe that's my personal bent as a lawyer who's studied this, free speech, First Amendment area. But, and as someone who values open communication, right? So I worry about the idea of government stepping in. I don't have a problem with industries self-regulating and with organizations of parents or families or whatever publishing lists or guidelines or those kinds of things. And I think one of the best ways to address some of these concerns. I mean, look, Apple and Spotify and some of these outfits, they've implemented sort of a bare minimum approach by saying you have to check that explicit box, or on YouTube you have to say that you can only not made for kids kind of a tagging. But with the not made for kids, there's no explanation of why it's not made for kids, why this should be restricted. But their YouTube Kids product won't show things to kids, or I guess maybe people with kids who have accounts on the regular product either. If it's not marked that way. And that a lot of that has to do with privacy and advertising. We're going to get into all of that, and not just explicit content. But Apple, the only consequence with Apple is if you fail to check the explicit box on an episode that's explicit, they give you one or two warnings and then you're done. They disable they take you out of the directory.
And they sometimes don't tell you anything. So your show's just gone. You don't even get a notification. You don't get you've been removed because of it. You're just not there anymore. And part of it is, and again, weirdly, it is absolutely centered around profanity. And the profanity, not only within, like when you're talking within the file itself, right? So within your episode itself, when you're talking this way, but also if you have it in the show notes. So let's say you are writing show notes and then you write out a profanity, some kind of profane word. Even if you don't say it in the show, it can still be part of it, because I do believe they have systems of being able to be looked at that way. But everybody's clean or explicit is extraordinarily vague. Like there is no this yes and this no, and everybody's like, well, is this okay or is this not okay? And they literally leave it up to, and then you disappeared, and then you have to, like, I've had to work with clients where I've had to look at their stuff and go, okay, let's be the detective. And then I'll find it. Oh my gosh, it's this thing that you had in your show notes that just remove that. Yeah. And then resubmit. So
I think that vagueness, that sort of ambiguity about it is there intentionally to create some flexibility to, say this violates our community standards. And they do outline what the community standards are to a certain extent, but I think they can do a better job of it. But back to the question about government getting involved and should we make laws about this? I think that's really, really, in the US, it's really hard. The government has tried several times to pass laws. Back in 1996, when the internet was still pretty new, the Communications Decency Act was passed. And only one small chunk of the CDA still remains. And that's the Section 230 that we've talked about relating to online providers not being liable for the stuff that their members, but the limitations on obscenity and indecency were overruled by the courts because it restricted adults' access to things too much. And there was another law called COPA, the Child Online Protection Act, similar result there. Another one called CIPA, CIPA, did manage to survive, but it's mainly about privacy restrictions and not content restrictions. And and so there are these constant efforts by the government, but the First Amendment comes into play here. And if one adult feels that they haven't gotten access to something, or their speech has been squashed, that's enough in most instances to say that law is overbroad and we're going to throw it out. So
that's wild. Elsie, quickly on that, with the government thing, do you think that they have a place in it? Do you think the legal system has a place in any content ratings, like in general, for protecting minors or anyone?
I think that it's a really hard line to think through with that. I'm not sure, because I have seen the majority of the least protected folks are often the first to be censored. The folks who are out there trying to draw attention to things that need to be looked at are the first ones to be censored and thrown out of places and silenced. And so, unfortunately, when you have that one weapon, it is often leaning towards places that is going to be of the most hurtful. And I want to protect my kids, absolutely 100%. What I have seen, even from the boundaries that I have had to put up, guardrails for them, and things that have been created for kids so that they remain safe, it is so frustrating because there are always loopholes where the stuff that I don't want them to have access to gets in there.
Yeah.
And it's issues that I have seen even with the YouTube Kids app, where there is content in there that may not be something that I kind of want them to be watching anyway. It just pops up, and it's part of the algorithm. Sometimes it's stuff that you can't really catch because, again, human beings are incredibly just
clever.
Smart. They're clever. Yeah, absolutely clever. And they're able to get in there and do all kinds of things in there that really they're not breaking any rules, and they're still, that accessibility is still there. And so content is so rough because it really depends on, it's very weird, but sometimes it really depends on tone. And, I've been diving in, and I think those of you who happen to have been watching this for a while have known that I have mentioned reality TV a lot. And it's very interesting because I have been going down the rabbit hole of reality TV and discussions that are going out with content creators and people being covered here and things going on over there and the actual TV show. And I see how the transference between an interview, like a podcast interview, where you are listening to somebody, and what is being reported in the trades and getting quotes from people who were in the podcast interview, there's a lot lost. I mean, it's not that the information is different, but the context is different. The way that it was said is different. The tone of the voice is different. The actual totality of the conversation is different. And I am really astounded at the fact that we are just really moving off of those sound bites, going back to a prior conversation of one of our shows where we'll go oh, I'm not even going to listen to that because they said this. And so we are dismissive, and we don't even engage with the reality of what that looks like. I think that there's something to be learned by a human being to be able to listen to a long form conversation, discussion about something, to watch a long form video on something, to be able to make your own decisions, and for you to be able to look at somebody's body language, hear nuance, and be able to go, they were lying, or, oh, wow, that didn't fit. Oh, I never thought about it that way. Not because of the words, but because of how it was communicated. And sometimes when you have those rules set by government and I would say they would probably have to go no more than 4 profanity words, no, only a quarter of an inch of the top of a chest, like no
Mhm.
nipples. You know what I mean? And so it's like, what if you really need that
Yeah.
to
Yeah, what
convey a
if you're doing
story?
a medical show and you're talking
Yes,
about how to do a breast self-examination or something like
something
that?
like that.
You kinda gotta
Well,
show a breast, at least, part of one.
and that comes to something that my wife and I were recently talking about, which is even sexual education in our society, which
Mhm.
is so like hamstrung in some places and so limited in some places, and it seems to be a really I would say it's a big problem, but nobody seems to be doing much with it. So
Yeah.
it does call to question all of that when you talk about it in the legal sense. We see it in everybody's favorite state right now, Florida, with how they're handling some of the books. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate that you both brought like a ton of heat on the government piece of it, because that's tough. I mean,
You know,
especially with the amount of trust we don't have with them.
I do think there's one area where government could step in. We could make some legislation that requires content creators or content distributors to label, disclosure, transparency about what's in here. And we could require it to go beyond just explicit language, but check the box if it includes this, or a laundry list of the kinds of things that parents, families might be concerned about their young children seeing, so that we can then implement some filtering at the user level, so that I, as a dad, can say, you know what, I don't want my 10-year-old to see stuff that includes or covers this kind of subject matter, but it's okay for my 13.
Mm.
You want to be able to build some filters. That opens up the opportunity for the platforms to create tools to do that, and for third-party filtering and stuff like that. Right now, there are a few resources out there that allow for um, sort of crowdsourced review of content to say what's appropriate for kids of what age and those kinds of things. And I think that some way to better implement that, some transparency on the creator and platform side,
Yeah.
and some tools to reach out and use that data, um, could be very helpful. So legislation could come in and sort of mandate some of that. And I don't think that would cross the line of
Mm.
violating free speech any more than drug labeling or food and beverage
Mm.
labeling requirements. That doesn't violate Kellogg's having to put the information box on the side of the
Ingredients.
cereal.
Yeah.
That doesn't violate their free speech rights, but to the extent that it does, we've decided as a balance that that's important. Nutrition information is important data. We could do the same thing with content.
I see that underneath there, Daniel mentioned, I proposed suggested minimum ages and content indicators, but I keep getting pushback. I would say in terms of the content indicators, it's a little bit harder for something like podcasting. Sometimes. But in terms of suggested minimum ages, I really have been thinking a little bit more about that, because of the brain development, right, that we have.
Mhm.
And I feel that my hope is that if we were to look back or think about, when the iPhone first came out,
Mhm.
to be able to be future thinking as to the power that a little device would have on our brains.
Mhm.
And then to really make a decision that was based on when kids would be able to handle this level of input going into their heads, right? As a totality, not the
Yeah.
type of content, but the level of dopamine hits that they're getting on
Mm.
the daily just by engaging with these devices. I have problems managing my own tech addiction. And how would I not, how could a kid not know this, right? And mind you, now we're both in the same place, as in like, oh my God,
Mhm.
right? So it's like it's an even thing. But what I do feel is it's challenging for that is because, I mean, we did it with with the DMV, with people, right? Like
Yeah.
writing, learning to drive. Are
Mhm.
there kids that are driving prior to that time? Yes, usually there are
Yeah.
some of their parents are helping them do that. Some people, especially that are at farms, are driving tractors and
Mhm.
younger kids. And so there is a scope, but there's a level of our understanding of the capacity of our kids to develop this way. as of now, we're looking at essentially we're not looking at the root cause. We're thinking like, oh, if I just don't let them watch YouTube, it's all going to be all right. If I don't let them on TikTok, it's all going to be all right. But we're not looking at their behavior with the device. That's the point, right? It's that engaging thing with the device. But also, we can't remove it because guess what we need for school? They need to do Zoom calls. They need access to Google Docs. There's all of these things that they have to have access to. So
yeah, it was like, imagine 100 years ago banning a chalkboard. You couldn't do it. So,
that's such a good. There's so many good points that you just brought up with that, especially when you get money involved. We've talked about that anytime money enters the conversation, and marketers, because marketers are not people that study business anymore. Quick aside, they're people that study psychology and human psychology so they can know human behavior. And why are they studying human behavior in marketing classes? So they can, like what you said, get you the most dopamine hits possible in order to keep you engaged, whether that content is something that's adding to your life or something that might be taken away in some way, or something that's manipulative to filter you into the thing to buy. There's a deep well. Even I thought that commercials that ran on Nickelodeon when I was a kid, I thought they stopped running when I became an adult. And I realized that later, eventually, that they only ran on Nickelodeon. They didn't run on every other network because they only ran all those ads for kids. I'm like, that's so mind blowing that that's even a thing. To some
I want to address, if you don't mind, I want to address this, the comment on the screen right now, this Daniel's idea of suggesting minimum ages and content indicators. I think the pushback he's getting is against requiring those things. And I think there could be some requirements, but, as parents, we could make a decision if look, as a creator, if I want to make sure that kids get to see my stuff, I could put a flag or a tag on the content that says, okay for kids under 13. And then as a parent, I could say, well, I'm not going to show my kid anything that doesn't have that tag. But again, then it's a parent's decision. It's just about information, giving us as stewards of our children's welfare the opportunity to make a decision rather than having to guess. So, there it is.
The other aspect of this too, though, if we go back to podcasting and we talk about it from the perspective of the 2 tags that I tell you that you can actually do, which is explicit or clean. Another layer to what that is that there are countries out there who ban explicit content as a whole. All right. So this is sort of the request, right? So there are a handful. I honestly, at this point in time, I do not have that list. And I believe Daniel would have that list because he did share that list with me. And it's like a handful of countries out there where if you tag your content as explicit, and as we've discussed, it has to do with profanity, it doesn't show up in the country.
Right.
You cannot have that there because the government has said, we will not have explicit content here.
And that actually goes to why, probably, I'm guessing, but why that we don't have other tags available, other checkboxes like that, because it runs the risk of additional censorship. Those countries or whatever might say, well, but it talks about sexuality, boom, gone. Or it talks about a controversial vaccines, bang. And it's a slippery slope of creating these sort of artificial boundaries of what's okay to talk about in various places. So if we give those, it's the other side of the coin. If we give those countries those tools, then we run the risk that they use them.
And to go back to the vaccine conversation that you were just alluding to here, Gordon, this did happen during the pandemic. Absolutely. Where anybody who had COVID-19 or even pandemic, I think, in the title of an episode of any show, all of a sudden was getting taken down by platforms like Spotify. And so people started to talk about stuff in a different way. Because there was the balance, right? So we had people who were genuinely talking about COVID-19 or the pandemic, just like in everyday life, like you have a chat show and we're just talking about what our life is like now, you know, or we have a doctor talking about the vaccines and very specific things, or we have people who are spewing misinformation about facts where they're not scientifically based. They are something completely different that could actually be harmful to people. You couldn't figure out who was like, you would have to listen to each one and who has the time. I mean, then it's like, whose responsibility is that? So then they would just delete everything.
Yeah. And so companies end up, rather than being surgical about things, they make a decision to just axe a whole limb off the tree because it's too much work, too much expense for them to do the granular level of filtering that needs to be done. And, and frankly, are we going to trust Spotify or Facebook or Twitter or anybody to be the ultimate deciding factor in that? I mean, again, I think it all comes back to us as consumers and us as the people who should be looking after the younger consumers making those decisions. And all I'm saying is the information availability of that information should be there, but then we have to trust the companies not to abuse that information themselves,
which is another question I thought of coming into this. A very just pretty straightforward. I tried to come up with some yes or no's just because we do talk about the gray and the fuzzy so much between here. Is just a simple, do you feel safe? Do you feel safe that minors are being protected by our most popular social media sites and apps without even calling out who they are? Just whatever comes to your head.
Hell
yes
no.
Or no. Hell.
There's no, yeah, I know, explicit tag, possibly. No, I really don't think that they do. And the only reason that they're dealing with it, because it's such a muddy thing to do. You don't want to get in the business of doing this. Even just with us, with Gordon talking this conversation right now, it is really quite the nuanced conversation. And it requires so much time, resources, investment of mind share, of development, of real deep thought. And what's the ROI on that? Almost zero, because it's really almost wholeheartedly to take care of society versus the bottom line, right? And most of these companies want as many people to be on their platforms as possible. That's how they make their money, right? So even when they set those parameters, it's not enough. They're not doing enough. There is so much, especially from both sides of the equation. It's like my kids like, Mom, I want to have Snapchat because I want to talk to my friend. It's the only way that I can talk to my friend, all this stuff. And I'm like, no, but Mom, nobody can see all the things. And I'm like, that's the point.
Right. I can't see.
Exactly.
I can't protect you.
I can't protect you. And so, and they're like, well, no, but nobody can see. And it's like, I know about these. I'm like, listen, because all I think about is what's the first thing that comes inside of a DM to anyone is almost universally the same, unless they know, actually, even if they don't know that you happen to be like a cis
Are you
male.
male or female, and how old are you?
Exactly. Yeah. And also, exactly. Like the amount of times that I've opened up a DM and I was like, oh my God, I didn't need to see that.
Right. Oh yeah.
It's something that happens all the time.
So
men. So
that I want to like if Elsie, out of 10, let's say out of 100 messages that you would expect to get from a random person, so somebody you don't know, like you're saying, how many would be within that? Would you say like in that line of complete unacceptability?
In terms of that, I've really nipped it in the bud. One of the key things that I started to do it early on when I was younger. Maybe I'm showing my age. Maybe I need to get more of these inappropriate things coming in my inbox. I'm just kidding. Please don't. It was the fact that I started to present myself differently, right? So again, I have to really there were lots of different things that I toned down. The images that I was putting up on my social channels, the description of the stuff that I was putting out there as well. Where I used to get all this stuff all the time back in the day was Skype, of all places. I was getting Skype requests all the time. I still do get, not necessarily images or things like that, but I do get people men who are asking just for hookups and stuff. And I'm always like, really? This actually works? Okay. Well, I mean, I just don't. But now the social media has put those other files, right? So the other folder where you don't even see them, and you can set that. You can set all these privacy settings, and you don't have to answer a lot. So they have really balanced that out.
Yeah.
But I think for younger minds, right? We are trained. I think, with my kids, I know that they would go like, "But mom, I got a message. It's my friend," right? And you're like, "No, that's not your friend." And but they seem, there's no awareness of this could possibly not be a kid. I want you to know that this could be not a kid. You don't know who this person is. You've never dealt with them in real life. Like it could be a whatever-year-old man that is trying to, we hear all these horrible stories. And how do you know? And of course, I'm moving from a place of absolute fear because it's scary out there. And could it be another, 11-year-old kid that just wants to make friends too? Absolutely. Do I want them to maybe connect and be good friends at some point? Sure. But it's like most of the time, it's just so dark out there.
My daughter turned 13 last week, and we've been dealing with her now. The systems, Google, she had, Google account for school and things like that. You have to be able to use the tools. Well, all of a sudden, 13 parents don't get to control access to things anymore. 13 years old, she can download and open up an Instagram account, and she did. And we had to have a conversation with her about what's appropriate and what's not. And in the DMs, if you don't already know this person, come and talk to us about it. And will she? I don't know. She's a good kid. I think she probably will, but I'm putting a lot of faith in her, and that her mom and I have trained her well. Not everybody can say those things, and that's a real challenge. When you ask the question, are kids safe? It's such a nuanced, layered question. Safe from what? What does safe mean? All of those things. And each of us has to decide what's important and what are our values in those arenas as well. So
no doubt.
A lot to unpack here.
It definitely brings me to something we've talked about routinely together here, and I know in here and out of here. And it's, I think, starting to gain some traction as a term. I'm starting to see it pop up in other places, but it's not something I see frequently. The concept of digital literacy, like it's even an important thing. Do they, like, this is kind of a simple question and it's off a little bit, but do they teach that in school? Is that like a topic? Is that a class, a subject at all?
I don't know. My kids are homeschooled, so there's that.
So yes.
You speak to it, Gordon.
Well, I actually haven't investigated this, and I should, because it really ought to be a class that they take somewhere. Maybe it's, part of the social studies curriculum at various levels as they go through school. But I know they get some. I know that my kids are aware of some of the kinds of concerns. My 13-year-old, when I said, well, look, there are some people who are going to say that they're an 11-year-old girl or 15-year-old boy or whatever, when in fact they're a 45-year-old man with bad intentions. Oh, I know, Dad. Come on. What am I? I'm not a kid. Or a marketer. There are so many people with money that are trying to get. There are so many people with ill intent at a variety of levels. Buy stuff. Yeah. It's always a sales message. Buy my thing, buy my profit, but pay me money, or give me your personal information, or give me naked pictures of yourself. They're always selling something, getting you to buy into something. And
they have to, I think part of that literacy, unfortunately, there's a lot of us already that don't have that anyway, right? So there's a lot of just adults that fall for the same stuff. There's the whole, what is it? Is it catfishing? Is that how you call it? When all of that stuff. There's the DMs that come into you, like on Facebook, where it'll says like, is this you? Ha ha ha. And you're like, oh, click. And then they take over your whole Facebook account. Or there's the one now that's happening on Instagram all the time. And the people that are getting really hit hard by this are folks that are in the metaphysical space, like people who are astrologists or people who are like mediums, and they have big followings, right? And they're really straight up and very professional about their work. But what's happening is there are daily countless people who are cloning those accounts with their images, with their pictures, with only a slight shift, and they're DMing everybody that follows them and saying, I had a dream about you, or I had a astrology, I don't know, whatever. And then a link to pay them $80 or $50 or whatever, really easily. And so because you've been following them and they look like somebody that you trust because you've built trust with them, you don't really look at their handle being slightly different. And you're like, oh, this is what they do professionally. And you get taken for that. So this is happening to adults.
Yeah. I mean, every day I get an email that seems to be coming from CVS Pharmacy asking me to take a survey.
I get that one too.
Like that. I don't shop at CVS, so I know that it's not, but there are so many people who would just click it and open and click through, and now they've got some virus or they're giving up a lot of information thinking it's going to someone that they actually trust. Digital literacy isn't just a problem with kids. In fact, I would say there's all the generations that have gone before the digital natives really don't know very well about this stuff.
Right. Which brings, for a different day and about 6 more hours is maybe that should be the part of, if there's a place for the government in this, it's to get it in schools. Maybe the digital literacy in schools could be a place that they could play a little bit, because you're right. The only way to
go home and teach your parents.
But truly, how many times is that the case with math, though, too?
Right.
That's the case with a lot of schooling. Is you get to 6th grade and your parents sometimes didn't get to see that until they were in high school or whatnot. So this whole concept of literacy is something that could be its own, I think, totally separate topic, to be honest, because there's so much there. I want to switch gears a little bit and get into a few more of the comments. I want to take a peek at them because we did have some, this one was one of my favorite. When we asked,
oh my God,
have a say in the ratings, this person said, whose country would set laws for this silly idea? And my response was, the same people that set laws everywhere, the federal government in that country. But
oh my gosh. I think that, if you start to think about everything that's right now, there's a lot of stuff that's happening government-wise as it pertains to privacy. I think things are moving that way. I think we saw some things happening in Canada that I sent you that link, Gordon. I haven't even dove into the deep conversation around some stuff that's going on there and what happened with GDPR and CCPA and all of those things. Regardless of, especially when we are dealing with the world and how we connect to each other in terms of the internet, whatever is passed in a different country, if it has to do with some kind of transaction, it's going to affect us. Right. It's just going to affect us. So there might be some stuff that's passed from a completely different country that does address some of these things that are impacting, in online.
Yeah, in fact, it's already happened. I mean, we saw GDPR coming from the European Union. The UK passed a strong privacy law a couple of years ago now, and it has influenced how we do a lot of the things. In California, they've just passed the law. It takes effect in 2024. A new Children's Online Privacy Act is going into effect that will see some major changes because, where goes California goes the world when it comes to technology stuff, at least right now. I think Israel has done some stuff in this arena as well. And the fact of it is, we're going to see these changes. Privacy is an area the government seems to be able and inclined to get into, although we'll see, there will always be legal challenges. But there's so much more than explicit and privacy issues. There's obscenity. There's exposure to, sexual predation, all these things. Protecting, ultimately, it just comes down to us having enough information and looking out for ourselves and our kids. It isn't really just about kids either, really, when you think about it. Am I safe online?
Yeah, it definitely, I think if we talk about kids because that's what we feel that are probably the most vulnerable a lot of times.
Yeah.
And I think the other cool thing about when we speak about kids and education and digital literacy, it's always occurred to me, I'm not like an educational researcher or any wild stuff like that. But it does seem to me that if you're hoping to have societal impact and it's a long game, it's not a short game. And the long game is to equip kids better, because kids eventually get to run stuff. That's the truth of the matter, is that we get to leave and the kids get to run things. So the more we can equip our kids in whatever way we feel that is appropriate, hopefully the better they'll lead us when they get a chance to lead, because they will. I mean, we see that with our Gen Z friends, with all the tech they have that are stepping up in a lot of places. And I'm really excited about it because they are the digital natives. They have been there and done that. I wanted to go ahead, Gordon.
I want to share a couple resources, but let's answer this question first.
Yeah, let's talk for a moment about how these could impact or specifically benefit creators. And the angle I'll give to you, just as an example, is as a creator, it is generally our goal to get our content to the right people. Is we're trying to find our audience, and this is one place where I think that some rating system could help, because we are only looking at ratings as a protection method, but I think ratings can also be used as a filter method if we look at them as filters. So I wondered, in the time we have, take about a minute apiece, if you wouldn't mind, or thereabouts, and what are your thoughts on how it could help?
Well, I think it can aid in discoverability. If people are looking for content of a certain level of intensity or covering a particular topic, being able to filter according to those things. I don't need to see stuff that's made for kindergartners when I go looking for information about a topic. And maybe, so I think it can be useful. And in fact, as we saw, there are other industries have adopted rating systems, right? The video game industry, the music industry. Actually, when the music industry, there was a big government move to impose explicit restrictions on records back in the, I want to say the mid 80s. And it sort of backfired. Actually, Tipper Gore, Al Gore's wife at the time, was the leader of the charge for labeling records. And finally, the industry acquiesced and said, okay, we're going to put this explicit sticker on the outside of the album, back in the old vinyl days. And what happened? The kids raced to the store to buy those explicit records. Similar thing has happened with video games that have the age ratings on the video games. Kids gravitate toward the things that are a little older than they are. So that's the downside, but it helps with discovery. So I think there's an upside and a downside.
Any thoughts
agreed.
on that, Elsie?
I think that in terms of the categorization, I think we do really need a little bit, what I would imagine, more tagging aspects of it. I mean, there's something to be said. I think sometimes when I go into Prime or Hulu or Netflix or something, when I'm looking at stuff and it says like suspenseful, thriller, romance, I don't know, whatever else, you know what I mean? In terms of content, I think is great. But not only in that, though, I'm working on a project too that I'd let you guys know later on. And I think I've spoken about this as well, where it's really about looking for very specific type of person to work with for your podcasting project. And I'd love the option of being able to go like, I want to hire a Black woman producer, I don't know, something like that, right? So where you can like tag and then go like, okay, and then all of this pops up. And I'm really quickly able to go that, because that is what I want for myself, to be able to find that. I looked in the past for a graphic designer that was from El Salvador that I wanted to work with. And how do you find that, and I wanted her to be a woman. So I did find her. It took me a long time to be able to do that. Much longer than I have friends who are graphic designers. I could have done but my whole intention in terms of my own personal values around this one thing that I was working on, I really wanted to work with this specific type of a team. And so it was very valuable, but it took so long. So I would like I see how it is helpful in terms of content and categorization at times. But if it's done as in like as a pro, how would I say it? Like what you said before, Gordon, which is not it's how do I, like I choose it, right? I choose to disclose that information in the same way that when I do surveys, it says, it tells you, like, it asks you your gender, and then there's the no option, or like
prefer not to answer.
Prefer not to answer.
Yeah.
Right. So I want that prefer not to answer to be there also.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
Yeah. I love everything you were saying too. I just wanted to reiterate that I do the same thing. A suggestion on that is overfollow the people that you're trying to target in that way, Elsie. Like that's what I do in LinkedIn. I've had to teach the algorithm to feed me certain types of people's content so that I can live that value as well. But it is a challenge. I definitely hear what you're saying. Gordon, go ahead with those resources. Thank you.
In the chat, we've got the one that Elsie put together for how to use Apple's screen time tools. Common Sense Media is one I want to call out there. When I was talking about the give us the information and let us decide what's appropriate, but having these organizations that provide some guidance, great tool. You can go and find movies and books and things like that.
And podcasts, by the way, they have a podcast. They have a podcast category who is actually curating this stuff. And Apple Podcast has partnered with Common Sense Media as well to be able to provide.
I'm talking about where you could choose a third-party provider to give you that filtering information. And it just needs to be easier. There's always friction around these things, but I love that you can go on Common Sense Media, tell them how old your kid is, and it'll start recommending movies, suggestions for kids, and those kind of. You can do the same, I'm sure, with other kinds of media. So that's a great one. There's an article that I found from parents.com by Katie Goldstein. It's titled, "I'm a mom and a children's privacy lawyer. Here's what I do and don't post about my kid online." And it's got some great guidelines. It's from May of last year, so it's fairly recent. And she's got some interesting takes on things. I recommend that reading to folks. So if we can get that actually into the comments so that it's a clickable link, that'd be awesome. I mean, I think, look, it's on us all to look out for those that we care about. And unfortunately, I think by the time government gets involved in these things, the damage is already done, and it's sometimes too late. You can't close the barn door after the horses have already left. You can. It just doesn't make any sense. So, unfortunately, government should be a last worst resort, I guess you could say.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no disagreement there. It seems like we have a big hill to climb in that way as we continue to push it forward, but also have a fair amount of influence. I mean, that really, again, is the cool part about podcasting, is that it's such a new medium. Is like you said, we have an opportunity. There's more of an opportunity with our medium and with this medium that is podcast, with that is this new generation of independent creator, to have a different type of impact where there's less maybe money involved than there is now, at least in traditional media. You get some different perspectives and different vantage points in a way that we just maybe couldn't before. Like, I don't know if network TV would have let a conversation like this even run, because it would have potentially been so counter to what is acceptable in most brands and media. So very, very grateful that we get a chance to talk about it here at Fuzzy Lawgic. Very grateful, again, Gordon, for you with all of your legal expertise. And I want to definitely guide people on this topic and in any topic we talk about. If you have a legal question, Gordon absolutely has resources or connections. If he doesn't have the answer, he's not going to lie to you. He is an entertainment lawyer, and we talk about entertainment and media. So he's got the hookup for you. I promise.
I do know everything, so that's never going to
be. And
so Elsie, good to know, Gordon.
Elsie's is one of the most consistent content creators on all the platforms. So find Elsie on the platforms, because she keeps these discussions going and takes them further with her other groups. And it keeps this piece in the right hands, which I think having it in the hands of She Podcasts and Elsie when it comes to leading us on things like ethics is a good place to start, because if you can start anywhere, why not start with that type of perspective from somebody who's got the fire, from somebody who's got the history, somebody who knows the people that started podcasting. So please check out Elsie's, all of her places as well. Mastodon is kind of where you hang out the most these days, right?
I'm kind of yeah, I think in my blog posts, you know, places like this is mostly where I am. Not blog posts, podcasts, live streams, videos, and podcasts. Social, I'm there too, but I tend to create my content and get to know me that way. So
where is each of your favorite places for people to find you at? Is there an episode that you want people to go check out?
Oh, no.
Just look it up.
Just look it up. Just watch my content. Listen to my words. I'm like,
find me where you like to find stuff and where you get your information. I've got a YouTube channel I'm pretty proud of, talking about this stuff, doing a live stream every Thursday where I talk about the legal issues around podcasting, and that's my current favorite thing to create. So check it out. G Firemark on most social media is how you can track me down.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for taking part in this with us. Bree, thank you so much for being in the background, keeping us all together with the thirds and with the comments and with the QR codes. Yay. And everybody who watched and tuned in and commented today, and everybody who provided comments to us beforehand. Thank you so much. That helps us to guide our discussion and also helps us to know where your head is at. So visit fuzzy-lawgic.com to leave a message or a question that you have for next week. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next Friday.
Thank you. Bye.
I'll hit the video button.
I'll hit the video button.
Someone hit the button.
Hit the button.
Someone make it stop. Oh my God.